in honor of our times there, I'll flash the wristband. So hope to see all you guys soon. Today we'll be talking about the virtue of love, and of course, in some ways, this is probably one of the most difficult virtues to write or think about. Love always seems to be always one step ahead of any sort of rational human comprehension, and obviously may need to be understood with faculties other than human reason. Still, even if we can't fully explain or understand or come to grips with love through reason, it seems like we should at least still, nevertheless, try to learn as much as we can through reason about love, and leave the rest to be filled in through our experience and through our use of other faculties. And predominantly, even if what we can learn about reason is that reason cannot explain much about love or really justify it in some way, shape, or form, that still is knowledge derived from reason, but perhaps not governed by reason. So it still is important and useful. So of course, just generally speaking about love, love seems to have many of its own rules, and seems to have many of its own sort of unique rules. The activities or the tendencies or personality traits or habits that would cultivate many other virtues seem to have no place in love. Imitation of others, training, certain sort of specific training, repetition of tasks, repetition of projects, diligence, persistence. All of these seem to work well to cultivate, for example, virtues of wealth and work, moderation, other virtues. But say none of these things, training, repetition, diligence, persistence, imitation, they seem to really have no real place in human love. And this could be the reason why many people, or some people that are quite good at cultivating those other virtues, find it difficult to love others well, because the virtue involves such fundamentally different capacities and is perfected in such fundamentally different ways. So, just a thought there. And then, of course, there is the question of, are all forms of love equal? Are they all just different? Is there a best way to love? Can only raise these questions at this point, but as we go through the series, it'd be interesting to think about, the most important question of, is there a right way to love? Is there a best way to love? Or is this love so different person to person or couple to couple that it's not worth thinking about? And so, one other generic comment before I turn to the work that we're going to discuss today is love. I think difficulty involved in love is a lot of it is based on the fact that it's sort of the virtue that is at the meeting point or focal point of reason and emotion. So a love that is sort of, you can think of love as sort of a river that combines reason and emotion. And, if you have a love that's entirely senseless, not based at all on reason, it seems in some way destined to fail. But a love lacking all emotion hardly would be considered love in any way, shape, or form at all. Without emotion, love would be just sort of a contract. It wouldn't even, maybe not even that. But so I guess the key is to try to find the right mix of reason and emotion in the practice of love as a virtue. It seems to be the essential question to how to cultivate that virtue. And so a work that I thought we would look at today that has some interesting observations on love is Dostoevsky's Notes from Underground. He doesn't talk that much about love per se, but he talks about the passions of man and the limits of reason in meeting man's most fundamental needs and man's sort of entire capacity and will to life which often makes man make choices that are not, rationally explainable or justifiable, but that still meet the non-rational wills or non-rational capacities of man that are important and should not be neglected. All of them, once we go through all these thoughts, I think we can see some pretty important parallels or important observations on the virtue of love. But of course, in Notes from Underground, as anyone can see when you read it, it's hard to tell how seriously you take any of the thoughts from the narrator's thoughts. The central character is a narrator who's, for the first half, he's just discussing his various sort of almost philosophically driven ideas. And he undercuts those ideas at various points. He says the narrator says he's just a babbler, a harmless, vexatious babbler. He says at one point that all of his ideas he was just joking. He says he's taking back everything he said because it was all mistaken, every single word. So ideas, and then the ideas themselves, the narrator tells us, are just his compilation of notes taken leisurely, jotted down. So these ideas that we're going to talk about from Notes from Underground, I think have to be taken with some degree of skepticism. The narrator is himself distancing himself from a lot of these ideas, so the reader should probably do the same. But we'll see to what extent they're useful. So getting into the work, I think four main thoughts flowed out of it with regard to reason and emotion. And the first is that a man in the world that acts based on a strong emotional commitment, even when that commitment has not been fully blessed or justified based on reason, that man is easier able to commit to things, commit to causes, commit to persons. The narrator says that an intelligent man cannot become anything seriously, and it is only the fool who becomes anything. Nature, Dostoevsky tells us, favors the man who is somewhat simple and who takes secondary causes for primary ones and persuades himself very quickly and easily that he's found some sort of bedrock of goodness or bedrock of virtue or bedrock upon which he can anchor himself upon. He's not too careful to look into turn over every stone or look into every possible counter-argument or skepticism, but he's easily convinced. He easily sort of is impressed by what he sees, and he doesn't wait to act. He has the narrator actually says to begin to act, one must have one's mind completely at ease and no trace of doubt left in it. When the mind is in that sort of state, gentle and relaxed and lacking doubt, it can go for things, it can pursue things. Now the case is very different. The narrator says for the man who's very rational and who's sort of cultivated his rational consciousness, the man who sort of prizes reason. That kind of person, the narrator says, sort of endlessly debates whether he's found sort of something to anchor himself upon, whether he's found a primary cause upon which to build, I think the narrator says. He continually brings up new questions to question that cause, to question his foundation to things. He adds further questions. He creates I think in the text it's called a fatal brew of doubts and emotions. He's caught up in a state of inertia. He sits often with his hands folded. He's not acting. He lacerates and torments himself endlessly with doubt and self-doubt. He replays details of past events in his mind. His imagination sort of adds new details to them, and constantly brooding, constantly questioning all these things. Very different again from the man that sort of acted without doubt, that went for things quickly, easily. So, in general, Dostoevsky's point, I think, here is that if we are going to pursue things, even particularly passions and persons in the world, then the easiest path or the quickest path is the one that does not involve endless rational sort of questioning and and deliberation. The second point that comes out pretty strongly in Notes from Underground is that man's nature is not just rational, and may in fact human nature may be predominantly based on things other than reason. Narrator talks about inventing adventures for himself throughout his life, so at least to live in some kind of way. He constantly speaks of having visions of beautiful and sublime things. Says that a romantic person lives to preserve within himself till his dying day this sort of image of sublime and beautiful things, and to preserve himself for the sake of the sublime and the beautiful. These are things that this sort of person is not practically oriented based on reason and calculating everything based on reason, but he's fundamentally sort of awed by the beautiful and the sublime. Let me find a passage here where he says that. He says, I should have chosen a career for myself. I should have been a sluggard and a glutton, not a simple one, but for instance, one with sympathies for everything sublime and beautiful. How do you like that? I've long had visions of it. That sublime and beautiful weighs heavily on my mind at 40. But that is at 40. Then it would have been different. I should have found for myself a form of activity in keeping with it. To be precise, drinking to the health of everything sublime and beautiful. I should have snatched at every opportunity to drop a tear into my glass and then to drain it to all that is sublime and beautiful. I should have turned everything into the sublime and beautiful. In the nastiest, unquestionable trash, I should have sought out the sublime and beautiful. I should have exuded tears like a wet sponge. So this sort of person, this sort of aspect of man's nature, living for the sublime and beautiful things, keeping that within him until his death, living for these things, finding the sublime and beautiful everywhere, turning everything to some sort of act of imagination into the sublime and the beautiful. This is the kind of nature that the narrator is trying to cultivate. And he says that basically he's not alone. That the man in general knows what's good for him rationally, but often sort of forgets about it intentionally, leaves sort of rational good behind, and sort of rushes on another path to meet, the narrator says, to meet peril and danger, compelled to this course by nobody and by nothing, but as it were, simply disliking the beaten track, and having obstinately, willfully struck out another difficult, absurd way, seeking it almost in the darkness. So man is here depicted, and later in the narrator's description, as someone that can understand quite well and can explain quite well, very elegantly and precisely. I think the narrator says what reason requires, but then immediately does the opposite thing. And unlike sort of the philosophical account we've seen, Dostoevsky, the narrator here, through Dostoevsky, says that can often be to man's advantage. That is not sort of the fall of man or his destruction, but those kinds of decisions can often bring the highest advantages to man, advantages that are even beyond sort of the goods that human reason would identify, and advantages that are goods that are sort of the dearest to man. The dearest things above all can perhaps only be attained when man sort of leaves reason aside, leaves this sort of endless conscious deliberation aside, and pursues things not out of reason but out of other things. We'll get into what those things are. And he says, the narrator here says that man lives not just to satisfy the rational side of his nature, but satisfies the whole of his being, reason and all the impulses. And although he says, although our life is often worthless, it is life. and not simply extracting square roots. Man lives to satisfy all his capacities for life, not just reason, which is 1/20th of his capacity for life. So again, the notion of a man or creature that's fundamentally complex, fundamentally has many needs, fundamentally has different desires and capacities and aims, and reason being a part of that. But Dostoevsky seems to suggest not even a very large part of that at all. 1/20th of his capacity for life is what the narrator sort of maybe perhaps exaggerates, but he suggests it's clearly a minor rule. So that's sort of the thought that comes through. And of course, one reason that the narrator thinks that is that a life devoted so aggressively, so persistently to reason is depicted here as sort of a very bland and dull, unhuman life. The narrator starts using different mathematical formulas. I think we saw that man is not a creature just to extract square roots. He says if we lived in a world where all human actions were dictated according to mathematical laws, like tables of logarithms that went up to 108,000, that sort of we'd all figured out exactly how to act in exactly the right way according to mathematical laws. That would be a frightening world. The narrator says it would be a world where it would be a very extraordinarily rational, he says, but frighteningly dull. There would be no more adventure. There'd be no human desire. There'd be all behavior would be governed by mathematical laws, and the world would look very different. Now, so of course, on the other hand, though, although such a world would be dull, I think the narrator is very clear that even though leaving reason aside can sometimes profit man, he's also very clear that it can many times cause certain forms of suffering. He says, and try letting yourself be carried away by your feelings, blindly, without reflection, without a primary cause repelling consciousness, at least for a time, hate or love, if only not to sit with your hands folded. The day after tomorrow, you will begin despairing yourself for having knowingly deceived yourself. So this is not sort of a utopian view of life that leaving reason aside will suddenly solve everyone's problems and cause you to feel unmitigated bliss. Not at all. The narrator suggests that often when we sort of pursue things in this way, a few days afterwards we'll despair of having been foolish or having deceived ourselves. Despite the fact that he also thinks at times it can be a great advantage. And so it's sort of a complicated view here. Again, the man hating a world in which reason determined everything, where mathematical laws prevailed, where 2 times 2 is 4, and that's all there is to life. That prevents man, Dostoevsky, or the narrator suggests, that prevents man from creating his own roads, taking his own journeys, discovering his own truths. A life where man strictly sort of lives by sort of road formulas like 2 times 2 is 4 is sort of a disgusting life. But on the other hand, he says 2 times 2 being 5 is sometimes very charming, but then he also says that it can cause you to despair that you've deceived yourself. So 2 times 2 being 5 is an act of deception, which may profit man, but may also cause him pain and other things. So it's interesting, the account that comes through. Now, as to pain, the narrator does not suggest that pain should be, or suffering should be at all times avoided in terms of human motivation or human action. We should not always fly away from any act that involves suffering or pain. Suffering can be a great benefit to man. The narrator says it can develop the person, develop the soul. It's not something at all we should not constantly be caring about comfort and avoiding pain at all costs. that the narrator thinks seems to be a life that is positively foolish, he says. So he sort of ties it up well by saying, suffering, even if it's going to come, has some virtues and benefits, and in any event should not be avoided in human life. So out of all this, we get some pretty interesting, I think, a few observations on love that I want to advance here and see how it later plays out in some of the other works we discuss throughout the blog, and cycling through psychology and literature and philosophy. See how it runs through. The first is that obviously love and any sort of rational certainty are in conflict. Love responds to sort of dimensions of personality that are very different from reason and perhaps far more powerful than reason. Love requires sort of a non-rational leap. If we were to always judge based on our consciousness when to love, when not to love, there would never be any love. Just as the narrator who torments himself with doubts and endless questions and replaying details and creating situations for himself, thinking of things that had happened, he never ever loves anyone because he's not sort of, I guess, simple enough to just love, simple enough to just act, simple enough to be motivated by things other than reason. And so certainly Dostoevsky suggests an extreme conflict here between love and rational certainty. If you want the one, you may not be able to get the other. If you want love, you may not be able to get rational certainty. And if you want rational certainty, you may not be able to get love. Second is love may lead to suffering, which obviously everyone knows, but that is not the worst thing imaginable. We should not do everything to avoid suffering. Suffering is, of course, part of life in some way, and suffering can benefit us. That if that's one of the disadvantages of a foolish choice on love, then, or a non-rational choice on love, that is something that we have to tolerate. That is something we have to accept as part of human life. The third view that comes out is love is not really subject to these rational rules. That this part of man's nature is not subject to 2 times 2 is 4, or this sort of simple cliches. We can't really know that much rationally about love in the end. Most cliches about love being meaningless, most books about love being meaningless under this view. Love fundamentally involving some sort of foolishness, some sort of irreducible, fantastic element of life. It just cannot be rationally explained, cannot be rationally justified, cannot be rationally simplified into bite-sized formulas like opposites attract or things of that sort, or various cliches. It just does not respond to those things. It's not subject to those things. It's far more complicated than all those things. And that's certainly a thought that comes through. And primarily it's because love is sort of at bottom an expression of faculties beyond reason. Not just that it's not subject to rational rules or rational justification, but it's fundamentally an expression or an outgrowth of faculties beyond reason. It responds to those faculties and is worthwhile precisely because it sort of activates and motivates and triggers those faculties. Not because love is not valuable because it satisfies some sort of rational conception of how we should live our lives. Fundamentally, its value is meeting the various capacities and needs of life that man has that are not rationally driven. The value is not to satisfy some rational ideal of life. It just is not. It's fundamentally different. That's sort of the view, again, we get through the narrator in Notes from Underground. And so the disturbing thought that sort of comes out of this, which we'll have to sort of leave with today, but maybe come back to in other posts, is love is, of course, one of the most important things to achieve in life. It affects a human life in so many ways. Lovers spend so much time together, sort of affect each other's viewpoints and personalities. It can result in so many elations and disappointments. But this seemingly one of the most important things in life, and things that affect human life so broadly, is one of the things that is also the least subject to human reason and understandable by human reason. And then when you're out of the world of reason, of course, even the narrator himself admits that things can go very badly. You can be subject to foolish self-deception. You can be completely sort of hurt. You can be completely fooled. You can basically feel like an idiot often. And this, of course, all of this leads to suffering, various forms of pain. Self-deception is never, once realized, is never pleasant. And so, of course, two lovers having different conceptions of where and what the love is always painful as well. So certainly the narrator suggests that this kind of this aspect of our nature is sort of willful pursuit of things that just do not respond to reason, but respond to sort of the will to life in each of us, can cause so much pain. But there is no easy solution. No easy solution offered by reason. No easy solution offered by any other faculties. In the end, the solution, there's no easy solution in not loving, because the narrator is pretty clear that a life strictly devoted to reason and never engaging those different faculties of love and emotion, that he says is the beginning of death. So that kind of life is not attractive. But then to love involves a life that may be very painful. So again, this takes us back, I think, to Pascal's thought. We talked about, I think, in one of the other posts, that human greatness is not at all consisting of avoiding the mean, the average state of humanity, how most men live. But in fact, in some ways, it means embracing it. And love may be another example of that, that the attempt to sort of create a love or defy the rules of love or the laws of love that operate very universally to escape the pain that is often involved in love and the various complications and self-deceptions, things of that sort. That is, in some ways, an attempt to leave the mean of love, leave how love is experienced. And because of that, it cannot hold up. It cannot satisfy man's nature. It will end up causing a life that in some ways may resemble the narrator's, where he ends up sort of tormented by doubt and never loving, only sort of in his imagination, but never actually loving a concrete person. And so we can in some ways say that love involves an embrace both of love's pleasures and pains. And while of course we can regret that human life and the human sort of experience, human condition is such that love is involving both of these things, and reason cannot really penetrate too far into explaining it. We can certainly regret this aspect of human nature and human love being as it is, but we can't change it. In some sense, what is the point of regretting it? What is the point of fighting it? And so, in the end, we get sort of somewhat of a disturbing thought here, that love may be sort of this unsolvable, painful thing, but in the end, something that we still must embrace because it fundamentally involves being human. So we'll see if we can get more clarity on these issues later and through some of the other posts. But I think Dostoevsky has given us a very penetrating, very psychological, very intense view of love that sort of may jive with a lot of people's impressions and actual experiences of love in the world. So on that note, and getting exactly to 30 minutes, I will end this.